Welcome everybody to TechCraft, this is Rob, and in today's video I'm going to talk you through the apps and the workflows I use to code on the iPad. Let's go. If you're new to coding and you want to learn, then I think the iPad is a great device to get started with. I'll show you an app that I'm using pretty much every day that I think is great for professionals, but I think is also great to learn on. And if you stick around to the end, I'm going to show you an app I only just discovered, but I think it is the perfect app for learning how to code on the iPad. For automating tasks and workflows, the iPad is particularly good. Now, of course, there is the iOS Shortcuts app, and if you're interested in hearing a little bit more about that, then chuck a comment below and I'll happily put together a video on that. But if you want to go beyond what you can do with shortcuts, then there's quite a powerful toolkit available on the iPad, and I'm using that pretty much every day now, either to write new utilities or I'm using the utilities that I've written. For server-side development, you can build some pretty decent applications today directly on your iPad. I think that this will only get better over time. I think as the iPad becomes more and more of a target for professional software, we'll see the ability to build more and more sophisticated web apps on the iPad. Now, today though, I'm mostly using the iPad as a convenient device for accessing and working on remote servers. Now, of course, I could do this on my laptop, but I really prefer the battery life and the form factor that I get with the iPad. And for me, the experience is nearly equal to that of a laptop. Because I want to dig quite deeply into these topics, I'm going to split this video into two parts. In today's part, we'll dive into coding directly on the iPad, and then in part two, I'll dive into the apps and workflows I use for remote coding with the iPad as an access device. All the code examples shown in this video are available on GitHub, and links will be in the description below, along with links to all the apps and the kit I'm using. As you'll see in the video today, I'm using my iPad Pro 11-inch with a Logitech Slim Folio keyboard and a Logitech MX Anywhere mouse. So before we dive in, I just want to take a few seconds to thank you all for your continued support on the channel. It seems like it was only a week or so ago that I was thanking you all for helping me get to 100 subscribers, and here we are now in excess of 1,500. I definitely didn't expect the channel to grow this quickly, and I'm really humbled by the support you've all shown. I'm having great fun in the comments section, talking about the iPad, talking about the kind of workflows that I'm doing with you all. I'm really enjoying hearing about your work as well. So please keep the comments coming. If you have any content suggestions, I'm really open to them. I love producing this kind of content. It's a topic that I'm passionate about, and it's great to have a community of people who are also passionate about it as well. So thanks so much. So let's dive straight in with the app that really got me interested in coding on the iPad, and that is Pythonista. So here I am in Pythonista with a blank editor open, and on the right here I have a console window, and on the left here I have a blank editor. Now if you look at the bottom here of the console, you'll see I have an interactive prompt, and I can type directly into this prompt any Python code that I want, and it will appear in the console. So this in the console here is where we see the program output. Now I can go into my interactive prompt again, and I can type in print hello world and do the default example for every programming language ever, and we get hello world in the console. Now, of course, what we really want to do though is make this a reusable program, so we can put it over here in this empty editor. So I've got a file called hello ipad.py, and I'm going to do print hello world in here, and then if I press the play arrow up here, it will run the program. I can also press Command and R, and that will also execute the program. So this is just a very basic Python environment. I have an editor, I have a console, and I have an interactive prompt. If you've ever done Python coding on your computer, you'll be very familiar with these concepts. So if I click on the little lozenge icon over here in the left corner, you'll see that I have a file browser. I'm able to store this file either on my iPad. So you see I've got a selection of files here, and here's our hello iPad py, and I'm also able to store these things in the iCloud as well. And I'm using some folders here for reasons that will become apparent very shortly. So you can pin your favorite files in the favorites part here, and I've pinned, for example, launch stash here, which is a utility that we'll see shortly and we'll be using a lot of when you're coding in Pythonista. So obviously hello world is not particularly exciting. Let me show you a utility I've written to run in Pythonista that will download the logos of iOS applications. You've probably seen in some of my videos that when I recommend an app, the logo pops up in the bottom corner and the name scrolls out from it. I grab those logos using the iTunes search API, through this utility I've written for Pythonista. So here we are back in Pythonista, and I won't go through this code line by line, but I will just call out a few important things. So you can see here I've imported the dialogues module, the IO module, the photos module, and the requests module. So requests is the standard Python requests module. You can download open source module that makes requests to third-party APIs. And I'm using this module here on line 23 to make a call to the iTunes API. Really, really good stuff. Once you've got access to third-party APIs, you can really create a whole bunch of interesting automations on your iPad. Now, the dialogues module and the photos module are both supplied with Pythonista, and dialogues gives you access to some simple user interface widgets, and the photos module gives you access to the iOS photos subsystem. Now, you can see here on line 13 that I have a function called getAlbums, and I'm using the photos module to get hold of the albums on the iPad, and if the one I want doesn't exist, then I'm going to create that album. And if I just switch over to the photos app, you'll see that that is this album here, and it's currently empty. So if we switch back, and now we'll run the utility, and you'll see the dialogues module in action when it prompts us for input. So I'll press the play button up here. It's prompting me for the app to search for, and I'm just going to choose to search for Python. Press OK. Now, this is another dialogue from the dialogues module, and I'm able to choose which particular Python app I want, and I'm going to choose Pythonista 3. And that app has now been downloaded, or the logo has been downloaded, and it's present in our photo library, which is amazing. So we saw that Pythonista supplies a dialogues module and a photos module for interacting with APIs on the iPad, but it supplies many more modules as well. There's a module for interacting with Bluetooth. There's a module for interacting with the notification subsystem. There's a module for interacting with the sensor subsystem. And there's even a module that provides a very low-level bridge to Objective-C. So if you use that module, you can basically call any API on the iPad. So the request module is a standard Python module that's included out of the box with Pythonista, but you can install any other pure Python module you want. You can't install modules with native extensions, that's not supported, but if there's a pure Python module like request, then you can install it. Let's take a look at a different utility now, one that I've written to automate some cloud computing resources in AWS that takes advantage of this ability to install third-party modules. So to manage AWS from Python, you need a library called Boto3. We can install that on Pythonista and in many different ways, but let me show you the way that I think is best, and that's using a third-party plugin called Stash. So I'm back in Pythonista, and I've brought up the file browser at the side here, and you may remember from the start of the video that I had this launch Stash file pinned to my favorites. Now I'm going to bring that up, and I'm just going to run it. And what this is going to do is give me a full console here that I can start to interact with. Now, this is kind of like a bash style console, but the most important thing it has is it has pip. So with pip, I can search for particular packages. Let's search for Boto3 if I remember the space. And there you'll see that I have that. I actually already have this installed. So if I do pip list, you'll see that I have Boto3 installed. So I can install any pure Python package that I want. So let's maybe install, I don't know, the Postgres driver. So pip install pg 8000. And that just downloads everything, puts it in the right folders in Pythonista, and away we go. So you may be wondering, where does it put these things? Well, if we go back to the file browser, we can see, if we scroll down to the bottom here, there's a Python modules section, and in here we have a site packages global, and then for Python 2 and for Python 3. And inside here, you'll see all the things I downloaded, and this is just here, PG 8000. You can copy modules into here manually yourself. So if you don't want to install Stash, then you're free to do that. But I find that Stash is a much easier way to manage things. Links to Stash are in the description below. So with Boto3 installed, I'm now ready to interact with my resources in AWS. Let me just show you one quick utility I've written, which grabs the public DNS name of my server and just copies it to the clipboard. And now we're back in Pythonista here, and you can see I've imported the clipboard module. This is another Pythonista supplied module, and I'm able to just call clipboard.set with any value I want, and that's then on the clipboard. If I run this, you'll see it just writes out the domain name to the console here, but that's on the clipboard, and I can now switch into my SSH client and SSH Ubuntu at the domain name, and there I am in my Amazon instance, and we'll see a lot more of that instance in part 2. So we're not just limited to writing this kind of utility in Pythonista, we can also write and run full web apps directly on the iPad. Let's see how that works. So here I am back in Pythonista, and let's just start with something really, really simple. This is an app using a Python web framework called Bottle. Again, bottle is included in Pythonista by default. I have a simple endpoint here that's going to be /hello and then /some name, and then I'm going to return hello and the name that's passed in on the URL. Now I'm running this on localhost on port 8080, so if I press play, we'll see that we're listening on 8080, and if I go into Safari, I've already got the URL here, and press refresh, my hello YouTube URL puts hello YouTube in the browser, and if I switch that to be hello Rob, then I get hello Rob. That's a web server running on the iPad that I'm able to access from the browser on the iPad. This is, I think, something that a lot of people will not know is possible. And obviously, any Python library that is a web server that's pure Python is usable in Pythonista. Of course, in a real web app, you probably have a lot more than just one file, and you probably have HTML files and CSS files and other such static resources beyond your Python or Ruby or Node.js code. Now, you probably also store your code resources in some kind of version control system like Git. Now, Pythonista allows you to write the Python code in there and you can run the web server code in there, but it doesn't provide a particularly sophisticated static resource editing experience. You're not really going to edit HTML or CSS in there, and it doesn't really provide much in the way of Git interaction. What we can do though is pair Pythonista with a text editor called Textastic and a Git app called Working Copy to create a really nice suite of apps which we can build a real web application with. Let's take a look at that right now. For Git access on the iPad, I'm using Working Copy. This is a really great piece of software. The integration with iPadOS files is fantastic. Every repository you clone to your iPad presents as a folder in files, and then applications that support the latest files APIs can just reference those folders directly and work within them as if they were part of that application sandbox. For applications that don't support the latest files APIs, Working Copy has a workaround where it will clone your repository into that application's iCloud folder, so the application sees the repository as if it was a local folder. I really like the way that Working Copy surfaces the most common Git workflows in the kind of primary user interface it presents. Now, rather than give you an exhaustive list of this, let's just see how this works in practice. So I have this really simple little bottle web app on GitHub, and again, you can get access to this code if you want to play with it. And what I want to do now is clone this into Working Copy and then work on it within Textastic and Pythonista. So here I am within Working Copy, and you can see I already have 3 repositories that I've downloaded, but to clone a new one is really easy. I've linked Working Copy to my GitHub account, so all I need to do is click plus here, choose clone repository, and then I can browse the list of repositories in GitHub, and I can choose the TechCraftCo bottle web repository, and then just press clone. And it's as simple as that. I don't need to know the connection URL, I don't need to have any credentials. Just by linking to GitHub, Working Copy has done everything for me. Now, Working Copy does have its own editor, so I can edit the content in here if I want, but it's not a particularly elegant experience. What I'd rather do is edit this content in an editor like Textastic. So here I'm in Textastic, and it's really simple to pull the bottle web repository we just cloned into Working Copy into the workspace here and start editing in the files. So if I click Add External Folder here, and then I browse into Working Copy and I choose Bottle Web and just click Done, that folder is now pulled in as a workspace within Textastic, and I'm free to start editing on it. So maybe I can go into the static resources here and go into the CSS file and maybe just change the size of these headers to 48 points. And if I go back into Working Copy now, you can see that this is already highlighting that there's been a modification in the static directory. And if I browse in, you'll see main CSS has changed. And this is highlighted red, but what I can do is bring up a diff view and either have a split diff view like this, or I can have a unified diff view like this, whichever is your preference. Now, if I want to commit this, easy done, just swipe here and press commit and type a commit message. So let's have smaller headers. If you're browsing the Git history later on, you'll see I've done this a few times already. And then I can either auto push when I commit this, or I can just press commit and push later. So let's just commit straight away, and then we'll do a push in a second. So commit, and there I go. I've got a commit on master. Now I can go back up here to the top level of my repository, and I can take a quick look at the commit history. So there's me playing with the headers beforehand. And if you have complex branches here, you can visualize all the branches in your working copy app. But let's say now I want to push this to my remote repository on GitHub. Really easy. I just swipe on the repository icon there and press push. And you can't see it very well. This is kind of the only nit I have with the user interface. There's a little sync bar that shows up. It looks like it's doing nothing unless you've got really good eyesight, but then you get a push transmitted once it's finished. This is such a smooth application. I really have almost nothing to complain about other than that user interface nit there. It doesn't crash. It works really smoothly. It integrates well with iOS. I'm super pleased with it. I'm super pleased that I paid money for it. So now that we have the web application repository cloned to the iPad and we can edit the resources in Textastic, let's go back into Pythonista and set this up for serving. So I'm back in Pythonista, and if we try to do what we did in Textastic and open this folder as an external folder, you'll see that it doesn't really work. I'm not able to select a directory. I can only select an individual file. Now, I could certainly select this app.py file and try to run the application here, but it doesn't work because the rest of the folder is not visible to Pythonista. So what we have to use is the little iCloud workaround in working copy. So back in working copy, what I can do is select the bottle web repository, come up to the share icon here, click on file sync, and this brings up my syncing options. Now I've already chosen a little directory here called bottle web for Pythonista, and I'm just going to click done and sync this into the Pythonista iCloud. Click done again. Now you'll notice that a new sync icon appears here on the repository status bar. I can click on that at any point and make sure that the sync is working correctly. If you ever find that the files in working copy are not quite in sync with what Pythonista sees, this is your first port of call to find out what has gone wrong. Now that we've done this, we can go back into Pythonista, open up a folder and start serving up this application. So here we are back in Pythonista, and I'm going to open up the iCloud folder. I'm going to choose bottle web. I'm going to choose app.py. I don't need to do anything with directories or anything like that. This is all going to work just fine. I can click play. Notice I've just chosen a different port number this time. I can click the play icon, and now we can switch into Safari to see this working. So here we are in Safari, and I've got my new app, and as you can see, it's styled now with our fancy style sheet. You can see I'm clearly a graphic designer, and there's a default root here that you saw in the app file, and I'm just going to change that to hello Rob, and this does what you expect. But you can see now that we're serving up a whole directory's worth of resources. We have multiple files in the application. Those files are in Git. This is starting to resemble a real web workflow. So I really like using Pythonista for all kinds of coding projects. Where I don't like to use it, where I find it's not quite enough, is for kind of data science and data visualization projects. For that, I'm using two apps on the iPad, Juno and Juno Connect. Both of these apps are essentially windows onto the interactive computing platform called Jupyter. Juno runs a Jupyter instance locally and provides you with a nice user interface on top of that. And Juno Connect provides you the same nice user interface, but to a remotely hosted Jupyter server. So you can do quite a bit with Juno itself, but a lot of sophisticated workflows will require Juno Connect, and I'll take a look at Juno Connect a lot more in part 2. But let's see now what we can actually do with Juno. The moment you open Juno, you'll see it has deep integration with files in iPadOS. In fact, the main user interface is essentially just the files browser. Now, you don't store files directly in Juno. It's expecting you to open files from somewhere else. Obviously, we're going to open our files from working copy. Now, I've already cloned an iPad data science repository that has some really simple data science examples just for the purpose of this video. Again, you can get this from the GitHub links in the description. I'm going to open up this Pandas visualization notebook and we can see what we do. So I've got a really simple user interface here. If you've never used Jupyter before, I'll just explain the interface very briefly. This is called a notebook. These pieces here are the cells, and these cells can either be code, they can be text, or they can be markdown. And the intention is that you're producing a document that has interactive computation in there, visualization, and also some text to describe what is going on. Now, let's run the first cell where we import NumPy, Pandas, and Matplotlib. All those libraries are included as standard with Juno. Now, we're going to run cell 2 now, and we'll immediately get an error. And this is an error you'll see quite a lot if you're using applications that share their data using the Files API. We have to give the Juno app permission to access the full working copy folder. And we do that by clicking on this little lock directory up here, choosing the iPad data science directory and then clicking done. And now Juno has permission to that full directory, and we can click run and it will read the entire CSV file. Now in the third cell here, I'm going to press run, and what we get is a table showing that we have journey data. And this data is from a sample file showing some journeys in the London bike hire scheme. And then finally, I've plotted a histogram of this. I plotted how many times certain start hours occur, and you can see that there is a lot in the morning and a lot in the mid-afternoon, early evening. And if you've ever commuted in London, you'll know why that is. A lot of people commute by bike. So far, everything we have seen has been Python-based. Now, technically, there's no reason why we couldn't have a language like Ruby or Node.js on the iPad, and I'm hoping that in the future we'll start to see that. But right now, your only real option beyond Python is an amazing app called Codia that lets you run Lua code on the iPad. Now, I'm not a Lua coder by any means, but I saw some screenshots from this app and I had to download it and try it out, and I have to admit it completely blew my mind. I think if you're starting out learning how to code, and especially if you have an iPad, this is probably the app you should get. The things you can do with it are incredible. Let's see one of the examples. So here we are in Codia, and you can see there is a great set of examples built in, and these are all written in Lua code, all on the iPad, and it all executes on the iPad. There's no remote server involved. You can write your own applications in here to this level of sophistication. But I want to just show you this one, which is the AR Face application, because this just shows you the level to which you can integrate with the iPad using code that you're writing directly on the iPad. So I'm going to open it up, and you can see here we've got a pretty nice editor. If you know Lua, you maybe know what's going on here. But if I press the play button up here, the camera opens up, and immediately you can see that I have the cool brick face. I'm so impressed by this. Now, I looked at the code for this, and it's about 400 lines, and that kind of blew my mind because I thought, surely it's going to take much more code than that to do something that sophisticated. But whenever you see anybody say you can't code on the iPad, I think just show them this demo and you'll see that actually you can really build meaningful things directly on the iPad. So hopefully this video has given you a taste of what you can achieve when using the iPad as a coding device. I think Pythonista is an absolutely essential app for programmers. Even if you're not a Python coder in your job, the ability to just automate your entire workflow with Python on the iPad, to me, is indispensable. Working copy and Textastic are essential parts of my own workflow, and you can do so much more with them than I was able to show in this video. I've just started working on a website for the channel, and I'm building an entire workflow centered around working copy and Textastic. That means I can edit the website with just my iPad. In part 2, I'll dive deeper into how I use the iPad to support my remote coding, and if you have any other topics you'd like to see me cover, then I'm definitely open to adding a part 3 to this series. I hope you found this video useful. I hope you found it entertaining. If you have, please hit like, please hit subscribe, and don't just hit subscribe, but hit the bell as well so you don't miss out on future content, and especially not on part 2. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.